Hey, thanks, Kate and PH and everybody. Thanks for having us here and organizing this again. It's been great to see all of my 2DGC friends and family real in person, and you can actually, touch them and say hello. And it's been great. Had a great time here this week. So thanks a lot for organizing this this event. Hi also to all the people out there in internet land watching this from wherever you are. I'm going to talk today about some of the stuff we've been working on in the area of foodomics. My lab has been getting a lot of requests and work related to food, many more things than I'm going to be able to talk about here. And really, it's said that, you first eat with your eyes. So hopefully everyone's nice and hungry looking at all this yummy stuff here. I hit on most of our food groups that we've been trying to explore here in Liège. But after your eyes, your nose follows pretty quickly, right? Like fresh bread, all the yummy things that you smell. And that's where a lot of our work comes in, and a lot of volatiles with two-dimensional GC. So I'm going to start with our blueberry project, and I've been mentioning it on and off for a while now. We've been working on it for a long time. Blueberries are pretty big, at least in North America. The US, Peru, Canada, and Chile are the 4 biggest producers of high bush blueberries, which is what most of you here in Europe would know. They're the bigger blueberries. 848,000 tons of high bush blueberries harvested in 2021, apparently, from those 4 countries, and that's 93% of the global production. And that doesn't include the low bush blueberries, which us in Canada really like, the little wee wild ones that we grow a ton of and we're the big producer of. And our colleagues and collaborators at the University of Florida are wondering, can we make a better blueberry? And better maybe ones that have a longer shelf life, maybe ones that are more tolerant to various different growing conditions, may taste better, more production on the plant, all these things that plant people may be interested in improving when they're looking at a crop. But if we're building a better berry, it still has to smell, taste, and look good. Otherwise, people aren't going to buy it. And that's where we come in. We get the really easy job. We've had about 3,500 samples so far come through the lab. We're expecting close to 5,000 by the time all is said and done. Many different genotypes. And then we have them that have been fresh picked, and then some that they have stored for a while and then packaged up to ship off to us. Different cultivation regions, primarily Florida and Oregon. And we get the easy job because we just put it all on our instrumentation, let it worry about it. The Florida group needs to worry about tasting and smelling and doing the sensory work on all of these, and eating kilos and kilos of blueberries over the course of a couple of weeks, which sounds fun when you get started, but I think by the end of it, you'd be pretty sick of blueberries. So this project is really kind of a multi-omics study that we're working on. And my group is working down here in the taste, aroma, texture level. We're working the aroma and the chemical analysis. And then we're going to help them a little bit with some of the machine learning and some of the data interpretation to go back to figure out the genetics and what's important in the genetics. And the methods that we're using are all in this paper here. So if you want to have a look at that, you can download that paper, and they're from Journal Chromatography Open. How are we doing blueberry analysis? We're running this on Old Faithful, 2009 Pegasus Classic. We put a new sign on the front of it there for the Lico guys. Basically, we take the blueberries, we puree them, put them in a headspace vial with a little bit of salt, then DHS that on our Gerstle system, analyze it on our Pegasus with a 5% phenyl in the first dimension and a trifluoropropyl in the second dimension. It's a liquid nitrogen modulator, and all our data processing right now is done with some version of Chromatoph 4. I think it's 4.73 or something like that, and some custom software. So what does blueberry aroma look like? Well, here are 2 examples of emerald and kestrel, 2 of the varieties of blueberries we've been working on so far. The emerald one is an example of one that is not very good. It doesn't have a very good taste. The kestrel one is one that tastes quite good, apparently. And how do we get laser pointer on here? There we go. And you can see that these have a lot of similar compounds. The Kestrel has a whole lot more compounds in it and a lot busier headspace. And the question, of course, in here is what makes it good or bad in terms of the smell? Well, we look at all this data, and this is data for about 30 samples, so 15 of each type that we have as some preliminary data, and then we'll eventually, hopefully this spring, have some data looking at many more of these blueberries in more detail. There's about 15 compounds in there that make the difference, and you can just allow you to distinguish really easily between these two groups, and they're the 15 major things that are different. Here's our loadings plot over here, are these blue diamonds. And what I find really, really interesting about this loadings plot is that all of the loadings are things where you're associating with the good flavor, the red. So it's more a case that, you know, we have good flavor compounds that come in and enough of them, but it doesn't seem in this case that the bad blueberries taste bad due to some bad tasting compound that shows up and makes us not want to eat them. That's just our initial look at this. With these blueberries and looking at the different compounds, these are the 15 compounds that were interesting. Some of them, like, you know, amylate 431, we're not sure what that is yet, but we're going to figure that out soon once we get some of our new instruments up and running and get to put these samples on there. And just to give you an idea of what these look like, here are a couple of the interesting compounds. Carbonyl and carbon are two of the compounds that show up, and the good blueberry is up on top. The bad tasting blueberry is down on the bottom, and you can see that these, while there are a lot of compounds that are going up and down between these two peaks here definitely do have a very significant difference in change between the two varieties. So this is sort of where we are with this project right now, and we're finally at a spot where we have a lot of data samples, and we're just working on starting to push through all the processing of this and then do all of the larger bioinformatics studies. So that stuff is coming this spring. Another one of our projects, it's a really neat project we're working on, is looking at wheat and the orange blossom wheat midge. The wheat midge, which is this little orange guy right here, he looks kind of like, or she, whatever, they look like a little teeny tiny orange mosquito. They're the #1 wheat pest in Canada. They do about $60 million of damage in an average year to our wheat in terms of lost production and grain quality. In a really bad year, it can be upwards of $300 million worth of damage. And basically they show up, they lay their eggs on the wheat while the wheat is flowering, or just shortly after it starts to flower. Their larvae develop in here, and the little babies, as they hatch, they eat the wheat kernel and destroy the wheat kernel, and that's where the damage comes in. So if we look at how we can protect wheat, one really neat thing that's happened here, if we look at wheat, there are a couple things that can be done. There is a gene called SM1 that provides some protection in some varieties of wheat, but we've seen in a variety of other crops and that this kind of protection can be overcome. They'd really like to have some other kind of genetic protection that they can stack on top of this. There's also pesticides, but they cost money to apply and buy, and et cetera, et cetera. And PMRA, which is the Pest Management Association in Canada, they are canceling the most useful pesticide this year. So after this year, we won't be able to use this pesticide right here, which is the most useful one against wheat midge. But our colleagues at the University of Manitoba have noticed there are certain lines of wheat that just prevent the bugs from landing on them and laying eggs. That's this OD oviposition deterrence characteristic. And what's really cool is they don't just protect themselves, they also protect the plants near them, right? So you have this plant that for some reason, the insects don't land on it, and they don't land on and attack the plants in, you know, the 1.5 meters, 2 meters around this plant. So that's probably some volatile getting into the air from the one plant that's, you know, telling the mosquito or the wheat midge to go away. So they're very interested in figuring this out. So again, we have this other study where we're trying to link this overposition currents trait through some omics to the genetics and understand what are the genetics that result in this trait, and you know what pathways are turned on in the plant to generate whatever molecules it is that keep these plants safe from this pest. And the idea here is that if we can identify these genetic markers, we can incorporate this trait into other varieties of wheat. We can get wheat that now can protect itself. And we can also, you know, maybe this wheat doesn't have a great yield, but that's okay because maybe we only need to put, you know, 5% of the field this wheat, mix it in, and 5% of the wheat protects the 95% of the plants out there that are the main producers, right? This is all stuff that we're working on. We were really, Sheri and I in the fall when we put our abstracts in, hoping to have a really good story to tell here, but mildew. So our colleagues at the University of Manitoba, they started growing all these plants. It takes about 2 months for them to grow to the stage where we can do our experiments. They were about to start doing experiments. They got mildew, had to kill all the plants, take them all away, bleach and clean the room, start over. And then it happened again. So there went 4 months of time, and we haven't really get anything. If we do have some preliminary data from just, you know, setting up the methods and stuff like that, which have been on Sheri's poster. You can find her if you want more details, or have a look at her poster. I think it's poster 3 upstairs. So that one we'll hopefully have more about in the spring as well. This one is a really fun one. Lambic beers. I'm here in Belgium, so I figured I should bring in some of our beer. And these are a Belgian style of beer that's spontaneously fermented. So they get the beer ready to go, and instead of adding their own yeasts, they basically just open up the windows and let natural yeasts come in from the air and start populating the beer and start growing, and off you go. If you want to know more about them, I'm sure ask PH. He probably knows all about these things. All I know is they're really yummy. So we got this call from Blind Enthusiasm Brewery, Edmonton, and they've got the Monolith, which is their new purpose-built facility for brewing lambic-style beers in Edmonton. It turns out that Edmonton, in the spring and the fall, also has a perfect climate for brewing lambic-style beers and getting this, you know, spontaneous fermentation. So these guys at Monolith and Blind Enthusiasm really wanted to start brewing these beers. Can we brew these yummy beers in Edmonton and these yummy creations here? The other thing they want to do, I think, is link some of the genetics to the flavor and the aroma compounds, and maybe figure out what's going on and generate some new varieties of brewer yeasts so they can brew these yummy things whenever they want. They don't just have to wait for winter or fall and spring to collect the yeast naturally. So we're doing our beer here by TDU with TDGC at the back end of it. And basically the sample prep for this one is dilute the beer with water, dynamic headspace, and off you go and do the analysis. And this is another example of one of the things we were talking about the other day, actually, with, you know, what column set should you use? When is good enough good enough? We're using the same column set we used for the blueberries earlier on. I mean, they're similar compounds, but it gives us a good enough separation. It's way easier to be able to just leave the instrument running all the time, throw samples on there and get a good enough separation you can work with, than to have to reconfigure it every time a student wants to jump on there with a different type of sample, right? we had a bit of a learning curve for them and for us. This was our very first chromatogram, I think, or one of our first batches of chromatograms. So clearly, we didn't dilute our beer enough. 1-to-1 beer to water. We didn't dilute our beer enough, but also they had some really weird stuff going on with their fermentation. And they said they think it's too good in terms of what was happening. We made a lot of fatty acids and fatty acid esters and not a lot of other things in the beer. So, you know, blind enthusiasm refined what they were doing. We refined what we were doing. And this is what our typical beer chromatograms look like now. And it's beer diluted 1-to-5. And then we go and do the analysis that way. And we also now start cutting off beer solid. And you can see a lot of interesting compounds in here. We've got about 1,000 peaks that show up in there, terpenes and fatty acid esters and other esters and ketones and all kinds of interesting molecules. So with this, one of the things we were looking at is spontaneous versus mixed fermentation. So some of the red peaks here, or the red points here, are PCA with 7 important compounds that we found. And the red ones are the spontaneous fermentation, the green ones are mixed fermentation. And these are some of the compounds that are up and down regulated in the different types of fermentation styles. And just showing, here's a couple of them here with the 4-methyl-1-hexanol, that red spot there, and then this 1-ethyl-4-methoxybenzene is another one that has a big change between the spontaneous and the mixed fermentations. We were also wondering, can we see differences between what we get in the fall and the spring? And the answer is yes. There are a couple of the spring brews that are quite close to the fall ones, but we were seeing a small difference between the fall and the spring. We also we're wondering about mixed fermentation versus time. And we did looking at the mixed fermentation on its own. The ones that were aged for less than 9 months are all over here, and the ones that were aged for 12 months just happen to project over that way. So something significant seems to happen with that beer between 9 and 12 months. And that. So this was an interesting pilot study for us. We're going to hopefully get another project going with them because they're very interested in this, and we're quite interested too. And the person who runs Blind Enthusiasm has a history in biotech, so is really interested in the science behind all this stuff. So hopefully we have more projects coming with this. So some of the things I want to just conclude on in thoughts. Two-dimensional GC mass spec is an invaluable tool for the study of foods and aromas. I mean, this is not earth-shattering news. This just sort of shows some of the places where we use it. Interesting, after about 3,500 samples of blueberries, some of my students now really hate blueberries. They have this crazy aversion to blueberries. I really hate mildew. I'm really not a fan. It has really thrown a great project, a big curveball for that project. Students have not developed an aversion to beer, but that may be because we've only analyzed a couple hundred samples, not a couple thousand samples. Maybe if after we get to 3,500 samples of beer, maybe they'd start to develop an aversion to beer. And hopefully we'll have some more detailed interpretation of a lot of this stuff in May, because a lot of these projects have now gotten to the spot where we're finished collecting a lot of the data, especially the Blueberry project. And we're now getting into mining that big data and seeing just what we can learn from it. And May brings me to the final thing I want to talk about, which is the 20th International Two-Dimensional GC Symposium. It's back live in person as well this year in Canmore, Alberta, Canada. So it's a very easy flight to Calgary and then a short shuttle ride to the mountains. We have mountains, which is great. People love mountains. For people who want cowboys, we can find you cowboys in Alberta too. We've got those as well. Here are just some images of that to give you an idea of what's going on. It's at the coast of Canmore Resort in Canmore. Abstracts are due February 17th for orals, March 3rd for posters. The early bird registration is February 17th, and we've really worked to keep our registration low. Students are, I think, 450 Canadian for early bird. Regular for early bird for other people is 600 Canadian, and that includes half board. So your breakfast and snacks and lunches are all taken care of. So it's a pretty good deal. Hopefully we will see a lot of you there. It's going to be a really good time. I'll just let some of these last few pictures here play out to, again, make you hungry. And that if you want any of the little flyers that I have circulating around here to take them home with you, just ask me. I have more. You can take them and share them around at home. And we hope to see all of you there in the spring. And finally, I'll just acknowledge our sponsors of a lot of the work, colleagues at the University of Florida, Ardar, who's sponsoring the wheat project, Blind Enthusiasm, and NSERC, who have funded the beer work, our core funding for the Metabolomics Center from CFI and the Canadian Genome Centers, and the University of Alberta. And all of this work was done by Ryan. My eyes are too old and terrible to know where he is in this picture. He's somewhere in there. And if there are any questions, I can take a few questions.